Hello ladies and gentlemen. In today's video I hope to answer some of your questions in regards to what the game will be like just before its release. To keep this video kind of short, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. Seeing as most players will end up playing by themselves, our first design is a small ship that will cater to a single farm and then the rest of the crew of that ship. In this example you see here, you see a green, blue, and yellow section. The green area is 100 meters by 100 meters. The blue area is 100 meters by 100 meters. And then the yellow area is 200 by 500 meters. This size is arbitrary as it will end up adapting to whatever ship it is designed for. So this layout is just an example. The green area would be dedicated to farming and possibly manufacturing. If players don't like to farm, then they would end up being able to purchase goods that are farmed from a global market. The blue area attached to the green area is the player's house. This area will allow the player to contain everything that they cherish, as well as store plenty of resources for their various needs. Players do not have to store any resources as they would all end up being available in the global market. The ship that this is attached to and what the green and blue areas represent will change based off of the character's preferred playstyle. If the player prefers to farm, then they'll be able to have a ship that has a farm on it and all of that. The section that would likely change is the yellow attached area that will be for NPCs as well as the town environment. So for the sake of simplicity, the green area will represent the farm, such as on Stardew Valley. The blue area will end up representing inside of the house of the farm on Stardew Valley. And then the yellow area would represent all the other maps that the NPCs end up occupying. So this would be the town, the forest, the beach, and the mountain area, and the spa. However, in our game, this yellow area will have many functions. One such area will be a hangar bay, where players will decide to disembark and go encounter derelict spaceships and space stations. These derelict ships could be procedurally generated, much like Diablo 3's maps are semi-procedurally generated. There is a certain structure that the Diablo 3 maps have to them and are kind of expected, but through clever map generation, they're able to slightly change the maps, so it's not quite always the same thing again and again. Additionally, on top of that, we may have derelict ships that function very similar to maps on Left 4 Dead, or Warhammer, Vermintide 2, or Alien Swarm. The great thing about these handcrafted maps is that they're usually very enjoyable and they can end up having a lot of lore crammed into them. These derelict ships and stations could end up being as long as the map creator would like to make them. This will make things more high stakes for the players entering the, essentially, dungeon. If the players are not able to make it to the end or decide to leave too soon, they might end up missing out on a lot of wonderful loot. However, they would still get out with the loot that they do have. If the players end up deciding to go through the entire ship and they end up dying somewhere midway through, they lose all of the loot they had access to initially. They'll get transported back to the original departure point, and this means that the ship that they went to explore will have vanished. It is possible that the players will have the opportunity to try to recover their goods that they lost, but it's entirely plausible that we may end up making the ship that they were exploring unavailable from that point forward, much as closing a rift in Diablo 3. However, this has a lot of potential to grow as we as a community begin shaping the game. Now, I know I said that we'll end up having these single-player ships, but we do want to appeal primarily to a multiplayer environment. As a result, you may end up seeing ships that are much larger than this to appeal to a larger player base. You may see a dedicated server that is able to comfortably house 10 players. As a result, they'll be able to all pull the resources into a single spaceship. This will afford to them a lot of additional farming area, as well as a lot of additional storage area. The benefit of this is that it'll cater very well to clans, but if a single player wanted to get a ship such as this, they would be able to gradually upgrade it to it. However, initially, a 10-player group will be able to get a ship like this immediately, so they can all start playing together immediately. However, they will lose out on the variety that would be afforded to them on the smaller individual ships. All of these ships essentially represent servers. We could graphically in-game show a representation of all of the servers that are up and operational. As servers go online and go offline, we could end up having the ships leave the fleet temporarily or permanently based off of what happens on that server. So as a result, say you and your crew are chilling on this ship doing what it is you're doing, and then you go to look out the windows to go see the environment around you, and you end up seeing multiple spaceships. You could end up seeing something like this, where you have multiple spaceships outside of yours. If you wanted to, you could see about going and transferring over to the other one, assuming that you meet the criteria to be able to go over there, and whether or not that ship is accessible to you or not. A locked server would be represented as a ship that is not accessible to you. You will, however, get the graphical representation of this, which will allow you to see the fleet grow in size, or if some particular event were to happen, you could actually see it shrink significantly. In the early days of development, what you could end up seeing is one ship being there initially, and then just after a patch, and then over the next few hours you would see the rest of the fleet show up. I feel like this would be a very cool immersion building idea, because it will give you the idea that you're not alone, and that you are providing for a fleet and not just for your spaceship, which would hopefully reinforce the idea of that everything that you do is for the common good and providing for everybody that is within your reach. We could end up having environments that are very large and accessible by multiple servers at once. This big yellow square here could represent a large colony ship that is actually being invaded by a hostile alien force. This giant spaceship would be accessible by everybody, and ideally everybody that is joining in on the fight with this spaceship trying to recover it from an alien species or whatever it is that's happening will be able to interact with one another. And then as they gather their loot and salvage and all that and bring it back to their spaceships, you could end up seeing this area get picked clean. And then once it is clear of hostile entities, we could end up adding it to the fleet. This could provide additional benefits that we could end up adding later. It's possible that this singular large spaceship could end up surrounded by a host of other ships. This way it gives you the idea that the game is actually growing with graphical representation, as well as providing some cool immersion building graphical events that you may enjoy. The idea here is to provide for individual players with the small ships, to larger servers such as the one with the 10 farm plots, or even massive servers with this large engagement area that could be entirely PvE. This ship could also be a large PvP arena where players could test their might against one another. If the server for the PvP arena ended up having to go down, we could end up having the large PvP arena ship leaving the fleet for a while and then returning and have some lore reason for it. But it could graphically just be because it needed to be updated. From here, we pretty much continue to expand to what players have access to, but it pretty much boils down to the same. If you're playing Destiny 2, which is an MMO, or you're playing World of Warcraft, which is an MMO, you don't end up interacting with many players most of the time. However, you do get to see many players be online at once, and you could end up running into them, especially in larger towns. One of these 10-person ships could just be a server that's meant to host 10 people, and whoever joins, at which point you'll end up interacting with the other 9 players in the ship at some various point. However, one of the slots would be taken by you. You could, however, end up having a ship that's for 10 people, such as this one here, but you could also further expand the farm's capacity by allowing multiple players to operate a single farm. So, while this ship may have 10 farm plots, it could have 20 players attached to it. This ship with one farm plot could have 10 players attached to it. It really comes down to what the hardware ends up being able to handle. Ideally, we'll make the game as performance friendly as possible. That way we could get as many players in a single player environment or server, so you could have 100 players end up boarding this ship to try to save it from an alien species that's invading it. The important part is that we make this initial framework enjoyable. Ideally, while you're on this spaceship, you can get the play experience very similar to that of Stardew Valley and Diablo 3, where you run and operate a farm to provide goods for you, as well as provide a source of income. And then through going on the procedural adventures, you'll be able to bring loot and technology back to yourself to be able to improve your ship or your farm however you see fit. But this is our first goal. Presently, what my goal is to make the green and the blue environment. The blue area could end up being very similar to that of No Man's Sky, while the green area would end up being the farm from Stardew Valley. And then once we have these two areas established, we'll begin work on the yellow area, as well. I've had some concept art provided to me from my community, and we could move very quickly from this stage to a concept spaceship. Right now, I'm waiting on a couple of artists to provide concept art that I will be able to put into Blender and provide example play areas. Blue Knight is finishing up with the Nano Wall mod, and then he will end up being able to work on the map generation as well. And then if he's able to get through that relatively quickly, we could look into generating environments where players can go and fight. What I would really like to do to start is to get the farm up and operational and get a way for players to manufacture resources and store those resources. Then I would like them to be able to develop loadouts that they prefer. And then once they have this area figured out for themselves, they'll be able to go work on the combat side of things. So very similar to Stardew Valley, the first few days, all you can do is work on the farm. And then after a few days, you can go into the mines and go mining and go fight monsters. For us, it'll likely end up taking a little bit longer, as we'll have to make the farm and the player house area first, then we'll have to make the NPC area, or the town. Once we have these 3 areas created, we'll be able to focus on providing procedural environments for players to focus on exploration. This will give us a lot of the framework right out of the gate. Also, this should additionally provide a fairly simple gameplay type and tech demo that people will hopefully be able to get into early so we can make movement and combat within the game enjoyable. Nobody likes to play a combat game if the movement is clunky. Nobody likes to play a combat game if the aiming is clunky. So what we want to do is get something established first. Once that's enjoyable, we can move on to the next piece. And then eventually, we could have a whole fleet of spaceships. But first things first is to get one of the small ships made, get the play environment there made, and get players the ability to start growing their own crops and farms, and hopefully work on the other elements such as mining and exploration and combat. As for what you might end up expecting to see, this is a good example. One of the concept artists on the Discord server has graciously provided this render of his fleet that he's been working on. This is Aaron, or Eric's 3D, on the Discord server. A large server may end up having access to one of the large ships. A smaller server may have access to one of the smaller ships. It is really open right now to what players will have access to. We could end up having it be where players have to build up the resources to get access to one of the larger ships, or to build it themselves. To build it themselves, they would have to gather enough resources to get the basic ship made. This will end up requiring tons and tons of resources. Quite literally, tons. It will, however, be a long while before we get to that point. The colony ships that will likely end up being accessible were based off of the Macross colony ship. As you can see here, it has more or less a city inside of it, as well as a small lake and 2 rivers. This is a very large spaceship. This would likely be reserved for very large servers. You'll likely only see ships this large once the game is actually released, and we have the funding to pay for a server that would be able to host as many players as a ship this large would be able to carry. Of course, a ship this large will not be able to have the full population of the ship be players, so a large portion of the population of the ship will be NPCs. Here's a screenshot from the Macross series where you could see the giant colony ship floating among a fleet of other ships. Some of the ships might look like they are dedicated to combat, and then you could obviously see some other colony ships that are smaller located around it. Hopefully these images provide you a better understanding of what you might actually end up seeing in the game. Right now, this is the concept art that we have available of a fleet that's been put together. I've been asking a couple other individuals that have been working on spaceships to create some screenshots such as this one for you guys to see. So I'm going to apologize to start because I know this is a very rough outline and it's very hard to get the proper idea for it. However, as you're watching the development of the game, I want you to keep Stardew Valley in mind, as it is the template that we are using. We are focusing on the farming environment, then we're focusing on the house, then we're focusing on the town, and then we'll focus on the other areas such as the derelict ships and stations. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Hopefully, over time, I could get a very clear explanation and visual representation available to you, but I can't offer any ETA right now. I do have some more videos that I think you'll be excited to see in the near future. I'll end up likely working on one of those after this video. If you're interested in seeing concept art as it is worked on, feel free to join my Discord server, as you will see all of the artists usually posting updates there. I have a channel that is specifically meant for content updates. I will be doing a video on this later. I apologize if this confused things a little bit more than for some people, but hopefully it answered some questions. I will continue to keep trying at this to make sure that you get the best explanation and the best game that I could possibly make. This is my goal and my dream, and as a result, hopefully we can all enjoy it together. That's all for now. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.